Because if you think about it, currently with Chinese stocks, they settle T plus 4 hours. So traditionally stocks settle T plus 3, but in China they settle Beijing time 4 hours after you traded. So that is virtually T0 anyway. So it makes sense to put down to the blockchain.
Hi everybody, welcome back to Value Tokenized. Perhaps the biggest argument that you hear on the market right now is that there is no liquidity, there is no trading for security tokens, but it is about to change very soon in 2019 already. A lot of institutional players are entering the market as well as completely new exchanges. And perhaps there is no one better to discuss it with than Andrew Powell, Chief Strategic Officer of Gibraltar Stock Exchange in the Asia-Pacific region. Thank you, Andrew, for being with us at Value Tokenized. Please tell us more about your background and how did you get into blockchain industry?
I've been in the financial markets for 25 years, 20 with UBS in Sydney, down in Australia, and in Singapore. My background was in derivatives trading, such as listed futures and options which trade on exchanges. And basically my role there was to implement electronic trading when the internet started to take off. So in the old days when futures were traded, it was a bit like a movie called Trading Places with Eddie Murphy, and people used to trade on the floor with signals, open outcry. And about 20 years ago, a lot of that went even a bit longer, so that went electronically, gradually went electronic. So my role was to help push out or propagate electronic trading within the ASEAN region. So I came up from Sydney to Singapore, as I may have mentioned, and started to sort of roll out our electronic trading platforms to our clients. So I've come into the blockchain space relatively late. I'm a relatively late comer, but however, I've been asked to be engaged to help extend and expand the impact of blockchain technology. So similar to what I did all those years ago with electronic trading, I just see my current role as a similar role, so helping to propagate blockchain technology for financial inclusion, particularly in this part of the world, in ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, so Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines. A lot of these areas need better access to financial markets and to capital. So hence I've sort of fallen into this role, so to speak, in the last couple of years.
What are the core components of Gibraltar Stock Exchange and their role in the security token space?
So just looking at the Gibraltar Stock Exchange, I look at it as the whole group. So we call it the GSX group, the Gibraltar Stock Exchange group. I think the first core component is the actual exchange itself, the Gibraltar Stock Exchange. So this is where we are going to be listing digitized or digitalized tokens. From currently, it's a regulated stock exchange under Gibraltar regulation, and also under the overarching European regulation, such as the European Securities and Market Authority, ESMA. So it's subject to EMIR, European Market Infrastructure Regulation, MiFID II, etc. So not only will we be able to list debentures and funds, but as of this quarter, we can list so-called digitalized assets, so security tokens. So we hope to be one of the first regulated stock exchanges globally to be able to do so. So that's probably the first key component. The second component is our blockchain exchange. So the blockchain exchange is the venue where we list so-called ICOs, utility tokens. So it's very similar. So whether we list utility tokens on the blockchain exchange or security tokens on the stock exchange, from a technological point of view, it's a similar IT stack. And then that probably leads me into the third key component, which is our distributed ledger technology component, which is our STAX protocol. So STAX is an acronym for Securities Token Asset Classification Settlement Protocol. So this will be the underlying framework, the settlement protocol, where not our exchange, our stock exchange, also a blockchain exchange, but also other digitalized stock exchanges can list, trade, and settle security tokens. So we envisage not only our exchange being on this platform, but we're engaging with some smaller exchanges, for example, in the Caribbean region or in this part of the world. And also some bigger exchanges are coming to us to say, hey, look, can we look at your technology, use your technology to enable security tokens to be listed, settled on their exchange, plus also this whole concept of interoperability, or as we like to call it, sort of tokenized depository receipts, TDRs, where you can have dual listings or multiple listings. So in the existing world, you have what's known as, say, American depository receipts, where you can have a listing, say, on the Australian Stock Exchange and also on the US exchanges. So we see a world where you can have multiple jurisdictional listings. So, for example, in Gibraltar, hypothetically in the Caribbean, in Bermuda, and you can also have a regional stock exchange. So you could have a Vladivostok securities exchange, for example, as well, to list, sort of Russian stocks in the Pacific part of the world. So we think this is very exciting, to have this whole concept of multi-jurisdictional, multi-exchange listing. I think, we have the whole sort of vertical stack from an IT point of view, but also from a process and listing point of view covered. So I would say they're the four key components.
Gibraltar Stock Exchange is one of the first regulated stock exchanges to also run a blockchain exchanges. And now we also see that many exchanges around the world follow this path, like NASDAQ, for example. How do you think it will affect the market?
So a lot of the incumbent stock exchanges, such as NASDAQ, the closer to your part of the world, the Swiss SIX stock exchange, they, for example, are looking to have a parallel process where they do existing sort of T+3 settlement, but then start to list digital securities on the blockchain exchange. So I think these incumbents are going to be very key in the uptake, together with regulation of security tokens. I think futures exchanges, for example, the ICE exchange, the Intercontinental Exchange in the US, is going to be very active in the custody sphere. So they will be launching what's known as BACT, BAKKT, which will be their digital custodian offering, which I think is crucial from an institutional investment point of view, and institutional broker-dealer participation is to have some type of digital custody. Of course, from a true blockchain perspective, one could argue that custodians aren't needed, because you have your wallet, so you need to manage your own sort of tokens on your wallet. But in reality, I think, at least initially, for the medium term, to get institutions involved, you will need to have some type of digital custody, which is a whole separate sort of conversation. And also, in this part of the world, the SGX has announced they'll be launching a small cap market on the blockchain. The Hong Kong exchange has stated that they're looking at blockchain technology for their Hong Kong Shanghai Stock Connect. So any inbound flows, say from Hong Kong and the rest of the world into China, they are looking to put this onto blockchain technology, distributed ledger technology. Because if you think about it, currently with Chinese stocks, they settle T+4 hours. So traditionally stocks settle T+3, but in China they settle Beijing time 4 hours after you traded. So that is virtually T0 anyway. So it makes sense to put down to the blockchain. The ASX, the Australian Stock Exchange, has been at the vanguard of all this as well. So they are partnering with Digital Asset from the US. I believe it has been delayed to 2021, but they have been one of the key instigators as well. And I'd also argue that our exchange, we're a regulated stock exchange. We're small, but we're also at the vanguard of deploying this technology. So that's from what I call the incumbents, the existing stock exchanges. But I think there'll also be further initiatives. Say, I know later on you'll be talking about maybe a question on the Millbrook Accord. So US, our friends in the US, such as at T0 and SharesPost, who are already there in the market, with exchange technology. I see them coming across as well, and sort of doing security tokens, as well as sort of digital REITs, real estate investment trusts, all these types of sort of offerings. Plus, I think you cannot rule out the big blockchain exchanges or the big ICO listing entities such as Binance and Huobi, the big Chinese entities. They will, by whatever method be there, whether they will have to sort of partner with regulated stock exchanges or get their own licenses. Like I can see, Binance and Huobi, being involved as well. So I think those three areas, sort of existing exchanges, whether they're stock exchanges, futures exchanges, these American listing vehicles such as T0 and SharesPost, plus the big Chinese participants as well.
Concerning custody services, there is this chicken and egg problem that institutional investors, they want to have custody provided by reliable financial institutions, and they, in their turn, they want more institutional money in the field before they actually start to develop and offer services on that scale. Do you think this is a problem, or it's already being solved?
I think I don't see it as a problem per se. I think it's more of an exciting challenge. So I think once Fidelity come up with their digital custody product, I think that is going to be a big driver for further institutional participation. So Fidelity, when they came out with their announcement towards the end of last year, there was a lot of excitement in the market. And I think also with the announcement of BACT from the ICE exchange, that's also sort of very, that's also a great sort of initiative as well. That has been slightly tempered by the fact that the ICE exchange have delayed the launch of their deliverable Bitcoin future. So that kind of goes hand in hand with the delivery of the BACT custody model. But I think, sure, it is a bit of a chicken and egg, but I think these will be solved in 2019. These big sort of dynamos get up and running. I think we'll have that solved.
A lot of new exchanges are emerging on the market, but who will have advantage in this race against such big players like NASDAQ or Binance, for example?
I think the more adventurous exchanges such as NASDAQ or SGX or Hong Kong Exchange ASX will continue to be at the forefront. I think the Swiss exchange is very interesting, because they have said they're going to be running this sort of parallel process. As mentioned before, I think Binance and Huobi, will always, you'll have to factor them in as well, including ourselves. So if you're looking to be fully compliant to all the US regulations, then sure, SharesPost and T0. Ourselves, we're looking to be to the regular European regulatory framework, and plus, the framework in this part of the world. So we're expecting more developments to come out of, say, Singapore. This year, they just launched their Payment Services Act last year. We're expecting more developments to come out from Singapore. They've just updated their guidelines towards the latter half of last year. So we're expecting to see the increase in regulation. So initially in guidelines, say from Singapore, being at the forefront within ASEAN and also Australia and New Zealand. and also other entities such as Shares Post, T0, so focusing on the US regulatory framework. But I would suggest that this part of the world in Asia is probably a little bit more advanced, I would suggest, than the US, which still has this bifurcated sort of setup between the CFTC and the SEC. So my personal opinion is that whereas the US still looks to the 1930s to Howey's test, in this part of the world, we've got clear guidelines from the Singapore Monetary Authority of Singapore. So I think this part of the world is better set up right now than the US, I would suggest. So sure, I think there could be some entities being set up here in Singapore, for example, which can, jump on the bandwagon, so to speak, and maybe names we haven't even heard of, but who'll be emerging from this part of the world, say from Hong Kong, Singapore, Japan, Korea, even Australia.
And speaking about Singapore, you are really active in the Asia Pacific region. What explains this focus?
Geopolitically, the Asia Pacific region is probably the most dynamic region in the world, and as we speak, if you consider its constituents, is the US, at least the west coast of the US, which is probably the more sort of dynamic part, I would argue, of the US compared to the traditional east coast. China, India, Russia is also part of part of the APEC forum. Japan, South Korea, and ASEAN, Australia, New Zealand. So I would say this is a considerable part of the world's humanity is based in this part of the world. So just from a geopolitical humanity perspective, and from a dynamic perspective, this part of the world is probably the most exciting, I would say, at this stage. Specifically for the GSX group, a large part of our investor base, a large part of the entities which are looked to list on the Gibraltar Blockchain Exchange or the Gibraltar Stock Exchange come from this part of the world. And also from our perspective as well, a lot of our technology comes from this part of the world, say from Singapore, Hong Kong, and across the border in Shenzhen. So from those points, APAC is a key focus for the Gibraltar Stock Exchange group.
Talking about geopolitics, how will Brexit affect Gibraltar and GSX in particular?
So we envision it will be business as usual, irrespective of whether it's a soft Brexit or a hard Brexit. We will still be regulated by our domestic regulator, the Gibraltar Financial Services Commission. Whether the overarching regulator, so just for example, as Germany is regulated by BaFin, the German regulator. The overarching regulator for all of the European Union is, as I mentioned before, ESMA, the European Securities and Market Authority. So whether the overarching regulator moves from ESMA to the UK Financial Conduct Authority, the FCA, we still anticipate, whether it's a soft Brexit or a hard Brexit, from a regulatory point of view, there will be what's known as equivalence between Europe and UK. So by and large, Europe and UK will have to adhere to, in my opinion, to G20 principles, the IOSCO principles, the International Organization of Security Commission. So from a regulatory point of view, Brexit, at least also personally speaking, I don't see there being too much of a problem there, because whether it's the FCA or ESMA, there will be this equivalence. By and large, they'll be all operating under G20 IOSCO principles, so we don't anticipate a problem there. Sure, there may be noise, etc., from individual countries and politicians, but from a regulatory point of view, we do think there will be consistency.
What is GSX approach to KYC AML?
Well, in a nutshell, it's full adherence. So just because we're a small country, a small exchange, doesn't mean that we don't. It's an easy avenue to circumvent KYC and AML. So, for example, because we're part of the European framework at the moment, regulatory framework, we have to fully adhere to POCA, the Proceeds of Crime Act. And we note that from March the 18th in 2019, all distributed ledger technology licensees must comply under our Gibraltar regulatory framework to the Proceeds of Crime Act. So Gibraltar is probably one of the first regulatory frameworks where regulation is done not only at the product level, i.e. what type of asset can you trade, but also at the technology level. So the Gibraltar Stock Exchange and the Blockchain Exchange were given DLT licenses. So we're one of the first of 7 or 8 entities to be given a distributed ledger technology license. So as mentioned, all DLT licensees will have to adhere to the Proceeds of Crime Act. And furthermore, under the European umbrella, we also have to adhere to anti-money laundering, to the European Anti-Money Laundering Directive. So currently AMLD4 is in play, but we hear that this year or maybe early next year, AMLD5 will also include crypto assets or digitized securities. So in short, the Gibraltar Stock Exchange Group fully adheres to these European directives, and I would suggest that Gibraltar implements these directives sooner rather than later. So there's no sort of 2-year window to comply. It's basically get it done now.
You already mentioned Millbrook Accord. Can you tell us more about this initiative?
So the Millbrook Accord was held in New Zealand, in the South Island of New Zealand, not far from where Lord of the Rings Mordor is, was filmed. So a beautiful part of the world. Essentially, the ultimate goal of the Millbrook Accord is to have operability between the signatories, such as ourselves, T0, Shares Post, where we are going to be launching a common framework to facilitate interoperability between security tokens. So the Millbrook Accords come up with a verified token framework, which will be sort of the leading industry guideline for interoperability and aims to become a foremost sort of reference document how to achieve this interoperability. It's going to be the code base to facilitate interoperability and also to sort of engender a community between like-minded security token exchanges or digital exchanges to help operability. But that said, we all agree that given that we have got our digital ledger technology license and we do have to start listing security tokens, we all have agreed that as a tactical response, we solve for operability within our own exchange and within our Stacks protocol. So anyone who joins the Stacks protocol, we will have interoperability within the Stacks protocol. But right now, we won't necessarily have interoperability automatically with other protocols. But sure, we could always have sort of a swap-driven interoperability where, sure, any token listed within the Stacks protocol, we could swap that out into the economics of a token listed on a other protocol, but that may not necessarily be immediately and automatic. But sure, in short, we all agree that we have to keep talking for this goal of interoperability, but in the meantime, we have to get on with our own sort of businesses. So, as alluded to, our key business or our key goals are our Stacks protocol launch this quarter and listing regulated security tokens this quarter.
It's great to see the industry cooperating and moving forward together. And we want to thank you, Andrew, for being with us. Thank you very much for this very valuable information. A lot to think about.
And thank you very much for having me. And hopefully I came across clearly for you and pardon my Australian accent.
We love your accent.
And hopefully we'll see you soon in Singapore.
That's right, Singapore or Hong Kong or somewhere in this part of the world. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Thank you.
Thanks, ladies.
Bye-bye. Have a nice day.